Okay, I think I'm going to talk about endings a little bit more. Specifically, I guess I'll tag it in the description. Somna, which, has a similar setup to certain situations that V finds himself in with Cyberpunk. And even though I haven't completed all the missions yet, I wanted to examine the endings because, again, nowadays I want to try to find stuff that has a more optimal ending. And depending on the genre, or the wheelhouse, with RPGs, you expect to have more choices when it comes to endings. That's the reason why Mass Effect 3 fell on its face, and that's the reason why people are having the reactions that they're having to Cyberpunk 77's endings. Now, granted, yeah, Cyberpunk doesn't always have, the most cheery of endings, but usually with RPGs, you have to have a certain set barometer of, well, this is the really big downer horrific ending, this is like the neutral ending, this is the okay ending, and then like here's like the perfect ending where things end on a much brighter note. you know it's all about like expectation. People try to aim for an ending where the character gets their just rewards, and most of Cyberpunk's endings, you know because to be honest, besides the Nomad ending where you leave a Pan Am and everybody else, they're all pretty downer. Like, uh, or very, very bittersweet at best. Like even the Nomad ending is still a bit bittersweet because you don't get like any big confirmation that V will ultimately survive. uh, it's a better confirmation than what Shepard got in Mass Effect 3 with the one slight little thing of breath. But still, you're still left hanging like, do they really only just have the 6 months? Um, and Somna does something similar, but that story is not an RPG. It's a set story that you're traveling through it to see what happens. You can make some mechanical like choices, and you can make a few different, flip this switch, or take this thing out if you want to. But even Somna ends on a better note than most of the Cyberpunk endings. Um, and that character, uh, what he goes through, like ultimately he ends up saving himself and the other lady. I don't know how deep I should get into the spoilers with this, but that actually had more of a cyberpunk aspect to it for the ending than Cyberpunk 2077. Like 2077, you go and you get attached to this character, right? And you want to see them succeed, but at every turn, somebody's either lying to you or there's like some sort of big setback. And there's only a handful of characters where really, Vic, Misty, Judy, Pan Am, and maybe like a handful of others, like some of the fixers, but they just mostly give you jobs. All the big players in that game somehow, still stab you in the back. It's one thing to become like the big head honcho of Afterlife and then go on some, mysterious mission as your like last huzzah, or maybe trying to raid the Crystal Palace for something that could extend your life. But I still think Ghost in the Shell did that certain aspect better. The Major basically merged with the other entity, and while she was no longer fully the Major or fully this other entity, you could tell that um, they were still learning stuff together, and it didn't exactly destroy each other. With your thing with Johnny, you can change your relationship with him if you want to, but the initial, meeting with him was pretty drastic, and ultimately sets initial tone where it's like you hate the guy. I mean, eventually you can learn to understand him and things like that, but it feels like they set it up to where, V is just a vessel, and that one ending where Johnny does take the body and leaves on the bus. Um, yeah, sure. Being with V and everything taught him to be more gentle and like a kind of a empathetic man in some ways, but it's like uh, with this kind of setting, it feels like they railroaded that a little bit in terms of like, oh yes, V's body's getting overwritten. It'll be a perfect vessel for Johnny, but oh, we can't seem to reverse this on V. It's like, why not? Maybe Alt could have stolen the technology from someone else besides Arasaka. Maybe, you could have added a character in there that, their whole entire specialty would have been a medical expertise, like say a program that helps with like Alzheimer's, and they could have helped reverse some of the damage done to V. Um, Also, there's like aspect of, well, why not clone some of V's organs and then replace those organs? Put that back in them. There's multiple ways you could have set up to where there's a way to preserve V's body to where they can keep continuing on. Because if it feels like it's a theme of survival in this story, which that's what it ultimately is, like, yeah, with RPGs, you got to legitimately give the players, a more sugar coated ending. Honest to God, like most RPGs will have that option. Even games that aren't touted as RPGs as much, like Bioshock. Bioshock gave me an ending that I absolutely loved because Jack was able to grow to a very old age, surrounded by his new family, and it was done in just like a quick succession. Him when he helped all the little girls get into the bathysphere, and then they went up to the surface, and he knelt down to help them out. He gained a family. Ultimately, what he wanted, he was used as a tool for Fontaine, and he ultimately gained a family in the end. And even that game, if you harvest some of the little sisters and save some of them, you get kind of like a middle of the road kind of ending, and then you have the really shitty ending where nuclear vessel approaching, gonna fire off some nukes. I mean, again, that game legitimately gives you a feel good ending, even though you went through a lot of horror. Okay, now with Samna, it has something similar where, like the engram of the person's whole entire mind is, inserted into whatever objects or mechanical constructs that this particular substance, the AI or whatever they had it set up, where the whole entire Earth was destroyed. But people's remaining engrams and personalities in daily life is inside this particular satellite, and you have to launch it into space to get them somewhere safe rather than being under the ocean. And he, with the doctor's help, was able to launch it, but he had to leave behind a copy of himself and also a secondary copy of himself, and it didn't connect with the character, until the last moment. It's like, wait, you know, every time I make a copy of myself, that other copy is left behind. So that's the aspect of horror, but it's a horror game. It's listed as a horror game, but in the end, it had a more uplifting ending than even Cyberpunk did, because that main character was able to be saved. Like, a copy of himself was sent to the more utopic setting inside the satellite, where everybody else was living out like a second life. And it ends where you see him walking up to the doctor that was helping him the whole time, and they both are setting off to go to the city. So yes, even though some of the copies are left in the dark under the ocean, ultimately that character was able to save a piece of himself to this satellite. And ultimately, I don't think that ending has a like kind of like a horrific victory kind of thing. Um, the other copies aren't exactly alone because there's other people down there. But it's ultimately a choice of like once that copy's done, do you shut them down? And yeah, and that's the part of the horror aspect. It's like even though you managed to get yourself out of that bad situation, there's still other versions of you stuck in the dark. Um, which Samna kind of has like a little bit of a Ghost in the Shell aspect, I would think. Like oddly enough, just because you're like, where does being human start and being not human end and everything like else like that. Uh, for the price I got it for, it's a pretty interesting story. But the difference with that game versus say something like Cyberpunk 2077 or like the endings that people clamor for is Somna isn't an RPG. It has a set protagonist, it has a set story, it has set outcome. Um, Same thing with BioShock, set protagonist, mostly set story, mostly set outcome. Um, even even BioShock 2, even though that ended on a bit of a downer thing, because you kind of want to, you always want to see your main character survive stuff, but the better good version ending for BioShock 2 has you um, basically being consumed or like added to what you consider your daughter, like in terms of like so you can help guide her, even though they aren't related. In fact, they had a kind of father-daughter relationship, which a lot of games don't do that. But the difference with the BioShock stuff and even BioShock Infinite, there's even an aspect of showing with that one where there's a version of Booker that will get to grow up with his daughter. At least it does leave it on that kind of note, but ultimately even that ending, still uh the difference again being there is the BioShock series isn't ultimately considered like purely RPG. If you get to make your own protagonists, customize them, and the game is supposed to give you choices, then have that game legitimately give you choices that will really affect the outcome. Um, as we keep getting, to newer and newer games, I find myself looking back and playing older RPGs sometimes just because it's like those legitimately did give you different outcomes. Like again, I don't know why more people don't follow New Vegas's bent in terms of like you can have different endings and even just showcase a few little slides, a few little added things here and there to just show where the character's going. Um, it doesn't really take too much programming, but the thing is, it's the writing part aspect of it that needs the most care. And I apologize if I sound very stuffy. It's like the allergies are definitely kicking my butt today. I'm like a leaky faucet right now. Like, ugh. But yeah, ultimately, it does come down to choice and whether or not you pull off the illusion of choice very well for a particular RPG. Because you can have a lot of these choices lead to whatever main ending you're going to have, but if it doesn't have a variation on tone and theme or even results, you're going to find that people will become disillusioned and be like, why should I even play this game again? Which for me, that's with like Mass Effect series. It's like, why should I even play those games again? All I'll get is, well, those endings. And seeing what they want to try to do with the next Mass Effect, if they're basically going to sidestep and like retcon that thing somehow, then ultimately the people that were clamoring for a better send off were pretty much correct. It's like how once you if you don't leave an ending just a little bit open enough, then if you bring a character back, it's like, how will this make sense? So ultimately, yeah, I see the Mass Effect series on what not to do with video games. Um, Hopefully, Cyberpunk will pull something with the DLC, but you just can't know. Yeah, I mean, because I found myself getting pretty attached to V just because they had just enough of their own personality where you can influence a little bit of things, but it felt like whatever choices you were making some sort of difference. But ultimately, for the endings in Cyberpunk, it all comes down to when you're on the final leg of it and you have to do the phone call to whoever is important to you, and then you decide like how you're gonna hit this thing. Do you do it with Johnny and Rogue? Do you do it with whoever you're allied with, like Pan Am? Do you just take the pills and die? It's just like, oh, like damn. I So I was like, oof, okay then. So ultimately, everything else we didn't really amount to the overall grand scheme of things when it came to the endings. Kind of like what Mass Effect 3 did. You're trying to do all these side quests to try to marshal up all your forces to get a better ending, and what do you get? Like 2 seconds of breath, and like, oh, have fun fighting Shepard and the Rebel guys, or have fun merging everyone. Shepard still dies. Oh, have fun controlling everyone. Shepard still dies. Oh, have fun blowing up everyone. Shepard still dies. You see like 2 seconds of breath, but they're still stuck in that rubble. Have fun. That's what it feels like. And even when you do the like fuck you Star Kid ending, which ultimately I think I remember when I initially played that, I just ran around in circles shooting the kid because it's like, wow, everything I didn't really matter worth one piddly shit. So that's why people are having the same reactions to the Cyberpunk 2077 options. You ultimately have to somehow give people an out to have, kind of like that uplifting, truly happy ending, and this game doesn't really give you that. Because no matter what people say, ultimately they're working towards a goal of the most optimal ending, especially when it comes to RPGs, because you give them that illusion of choice. Again, sometimes some games pull this off better. Again, BioShock is, I know I say again a lot, but it's just a quirk I have, or like a whatever it is, a particular verbal tick. But yeah, well, I wish more people would even copy BioShock, because even if it was a little thing, saving all the little sisters did give you that perfect ending. I would say for Jack, because he was being pulled around by everybody, but in the end, he ultimately got what he wanted. How is this so hard, game developers? Give people their sugar-coated, everything is fine and handy and dandy and hunky-dory ending. Give them that option in your game, especially if you are an RPG. Because that's what people do try to do. Like, when they see RPGs, they're like, okay, hero's journey, I want my happy ending. Hero's journey, I want my happy ending. They're even though in books and other media that people say like all that stuff is old hat and nobody wants it anymore, that's a lie. People play to escape, so give them a true escapist ending where things do turn out well. And then they'll go back and see, like, okay, what are some of the fucked up endings? That's all I can really say. It's like, I don't even know what to title this. I guess I could just title it, like, Happy Endings Part 2, because I was just going to try to go into more of this stuff. Oh, boy. As much as I keep trying to deny it, people do want their happy endings. I just don't obfuscate that fact. I'm pretty up in people's faces about that fact. you can have like a more intellectual ending, I guess, if you want to, but then don't tote your game as an RPG if you're going to do that. Um, it's pretty telling that some people are even saying like The Witcher had better endings for Geralt. I haven't played through all of Witcher 3 yet. I think I only got about 45 hours in it. Um, but even yeah, some aspects of that, it's like, damn, man. Stop giving people horrific victories. It just leaves you feeling hollowed out and like, why the hell should I even play this some more, or even try to replay it. Plus, not all cyberpunk has to end on, well, you die. Um, to me, a decent cyberpunk story does bring up the question of, where does your body stop and your mind go, like with all the augments and everything? What does define the human soul? Like in terms of like first is the technology. But yeah, even with that, it's more like the exploration and the journey, and then not not all cyberpunk ends on a drastically bad note. I honestly think most more people should go watch Ghost in the Shell, the movie, and also the actual series. First and second gig, because that'll give you a pretty good idea of what kind of cyberpunk themes do pop up. And but yeah, oof. There could have been so many ways to so many different kinds of ways to end cyberpunk, but it ultimately they, to me, I think there should have been an ending where Johnny and V are actually properly merged, and then they can continue on, in that body, because that would have tied in with what the monk was saying, like you have two souls fighting within you. Because that's a side quest I found while I was, dorking around looking for things and seeing what's out there. There could have been an ending where, depending on how your relationship is going with Johnny, he could have maybe done a hostile takeover of your body. There could have been an ending where he leaves very willingly, and all the other bullshit with Alt, where it's like, yeah, with the way they handled Alt, I think could have been done better, where it's like, oh yes, we're going to just arbitrarily railroad the character's body dilemma with Alt just rewriting it, and like, oh yeah, Alt is just going to use Soul Killer on V. No questions asked, like, boom. It's like, yeah, Alt made a decision because Alt thought it was best, but that's not really the Alt that I guess Johnny knew. It's like a mixture of her and whatever Soul Killer AI shenanigans are going on. But that's also a case of they should have added a path where, a character could ultimately heal V's body, like damaged body. Maybe it could have been somebody who was an expert in healing and technology and things like that, and legitimately able to help the character. That, I think, part of it got railroaded because of what its development cycle was. Because if what I'm reading about is true, like they really only started on it after they finished Witcher 3 stuff, then yeah, it's only had a dev cycle of maybe 3 to 4 years. And sometimes planning out games, the initial planning stages probably can take up to a year easily. So yeah, what else can I say on it? When it comes to RPGs, just plan for having that uplifting ending. Give players that option, because in the end, that's ultimately what they're looking for. See you later, everybody.